Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to another installment of Show to V with Mike G, the show of life, the show of Noble Oak Whiskey, Baby Yoda, cracking jokes on Twitter, Connecticut, and so much more. It's been months in the making, but I finally got the opportunity to sit down with Tom Johnson of Noble Oak. He was really doing great work there in New York, decided to bike to Seattle, where he now resides, and take full ownership, a one-man team, if you will, for Noble Oak Whiskey. Their new rye will be arriving in Austin, Texas any day now, and there's a great little party that they're throwing next week with Terry and Nick of Here Nor There in San Antonio for the cocktail conference. So, without further ado, I hope you guys enjoyed this great chat with Tom Johnson. I really do.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, and
Thank you for being one of the 5 real people that follows me.
That's right. But there's a humor, there's a lightness to it. But what I want to ask you is, with inspiration, I think David Foster Wallace, for instance, Infinite Jest, and like these deeply cerebral kinds of figures, and of course a little bit of Star Wars thrown in there too. How do you navigate such a free-flowing and opportune place to say something wrong? How do you navigate that space as a brand ambassador, as a dude?
I just assume that nobody follows me on Twitter that has anything to do with what I do professionally. So I just treat it as a free space, and my Facebook has grown much less inflammatory. I have far fewer hot takes on Facebook these days because I think that space has gotten increasingly fraught, particularly brand-wise and professionally, and in the bartender community. So there are a few active folks in our community on Twitter, but that's not really the sphere that I live in on Twitter. It's much more like politics and pop culture and talking shit.
Yeah, which I think's where it comes to be funny.
That's the fun part.
You know? Are you worried? Like, I'm still on Twitter, obviously, because I'm looking at stuff here and there, and I think it's really good to know what's your finger on the pulse of news and stuff. I think it's good for that. But how do you feel what effect it's having, like, on us, as I do this proverbial us move, the community, not even the booze community, but just people in general?
Yeah, Twitter's like the best thing and the worst thing.
Yeah.
So obviously the status that it's grown to politically, and as like a delivery system for, war now even, and happening at the highest level internationally, instantaneously. Mm-hmm. Like this past week we saw in real life, war de-escalate in real time on crazy. Twitter, and that's absurd. But it's also like if you thought about a joke when you saw the Cats movie, it already happened on Twitter. It's like Jungian theory happening in front of you. It's crazy.
As a philosophy major, this has to be one of the most fertile grounds for you to observe people, to put information out there. And does that appeal to your very cerebral nature to be able to leverage and flex that muscle?
I guess. I mean, since I got the degree, I feel like all I've done is got dumber. And it's like this cycle of constantly getting dumber and then looking back and at moments that I believed for sure that I was the smartest person in the room and being like, what a dumb, snot-nosed asshole.
So now as you've gotten wiser, because you're, mid-30s, early 30s?
Yeah, 33.
Like 33, right? Yeah. And that's one of the things I think we learn. Have you learned that listening is always better than talking? And I know this is a suggestive thing, but I feel like that's one of the paramount things to be able to do to be successful.
Yeah, the old adage that you got 2 ears and one mouth and you should use them in that proportion.
Yeah.
I think is definitely true, and I'm very bad at observing it, even still, quite often. I think that, I don't know, I've gotten like tired of having loud opinions kind of as I get older, and still no less good at not having loud opinions or whatever.
so as you've matured, right? Because you've been doing this for quite some time. If I understand the tale correctly, you're in a band in Providence, Rhode Island. You make the move over to New York. You work for Click and Sons and to Jean Georges or whatever. Right? And so really, really getting into hospitality. So let's reflect for a bit. Because this is, 8 to 10 years in the industry at this point?
About that, yeah. And really, thank you for the generosity. Welcome to the Show to V podcast with Mike G, by the way, the Mark Maron of the Spirits of Bartending world. This is a lot more like the WTF podcast than any of the other big players out there.
Tom, I'm going to say one thing.
I'm just redirecting so that I don't have to...
No, and I'm going to give you this. I don't normally give anyone that opportunity, but Mark Maron is the only reason I did this. He is actually specifically the reason I started a podcast. And in fact, I can't listen to a show anymore because it was so similar in nature in terms of what I was trying to do. And thanks for that, because that's it. That's why we're both here.
Yeah, we're just two people talking, and whether that's some of the industry titans that you've had on in the last couple of weeks, or whatever it is that I am and I do. But yeah, that's.
Are you like best supporting actor? Is that kind of what you classify yourself as?
Probably. And I think that's pretty generous too. That's like a pretty generous reading of my growth and development trajectory in this industry. A lot more what it feels like to me, and I'm probably the least interesting person to talk to about my own biography in this business, is that like I was piggybacking on Eric Jobs' coattails, which is interesting. Again, sure. I mentioned before we got on air that I accidentally listened to your podcast with Eric Job because it was labeled Mike G in my meta text. So it's fun to hear like his story, and if you go back and listen to that, viewers at home, then that'll give a lot of context to kind of my growth. So yeah, I describe it as I kind of had a midlife crisis in my mid-20s after graduating college. I didn't know what I wanted to do. The economy had collapsed. Moved to Providence, Rhode Island, where I was working in libraries. Mm-hmm. And Eric Job had already made his leap from ice cream scooper extraordinaire to moving to New York and working for Kraft and opening Colicchio and Sons.
Did you guys didn't grow up together though, did you?
We did. We went to high school together. In fact,
holy shit, I didn't know that.
Yeah, he beat me out for Homecoming King. So
what?
that was the birth of our friendship.
That's incredible. Because there is a similar accessibility, a similar level-headedness that I see between the two of you. And I don't want to attribute it to Connecticut. I really don't. Never been there. But it's quite possible there's Midwestern sensibilities. You never meet someone from Wisconsin you don't like. That's never the case. So, all right. When I had talked to Eric, because you guys are similar in age, went to high school together, this is great. He, to me, and I would talk to him about this person too, but he seemed like he was hitting a point where his body was taking a really big burden from the industry. Like it was really taking the piss out of him. And any industry could do that, especially the booze industry after 8 to 10 years. How, for you, are you feeling in terms of mental acuity and your physical ability to do things? Is this taking its toll on you?
Oh, big time. Yeah. And that he was kind of the model for a lot of my growth and trajectory in this industry. As much as we're peers and buddies and went to high school together and kind of grew up in this industry together, he is like a, ball of charisma.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I was the best supporting actor type so much as kind of a producer role, and have kind of identified my growth as tagging along with great crews and kind of boosting their abilities or getting them a bigger platform. And like, I think that was the story of us at Extra Fancy. And then he jumped into the brand world. I jumped on a bike, rode it to Seattle, and then ended up in the brand world anyways.
Yeah.
With kind of him as a model of, this is how you do the gig. It's like, you go out until the bar closes every night. And I don't have the same skill set that he did or that he does.
Yeah.
So kind of trying to use that as a model, but also grow into it in a different way and lean more on the things that I do well in terms of like creativity or event production or finding platforms to build communities and boost other people up more than be the star of the show myself. Because I have flashes of that sometimes. But I think I find that more exhausting, and that's kind of where the toll comes. But yeah, just the grind of sitting on airplanes and eating and drinking 10 to 12 hours a day, 6 or so days a week.
Yeah.
takes its toll on you for sure.
You know, it's interesting, and I never really drew the parallel till you said that, is there's lots of food shows. They're just like more like carnival food, state fair food, big food, small food, everything in between. And you start seeing, because the whole job is consumption, right? It's being on and it's consumption. You see these hosts start to gain weight. You see them to start. Siri's apparently listening to me, which, if anyone wanted to know, it is in fact listening. No, but it breaks them down, eating and doing it all the time. So when you talk about balance, what do you do to offset 12 hours of this lifestyle a day, 6 to 7 days a week?
I've thought about it as kind of having a learning curve, this gig. And actually, when I went on Eric Castro's podcast, that's kind of what we talked about. It's like, what's the learning curve? But I still only have been doing this job in a national capacity for just a year.
Yeah.
And so I think I'm still in the meat of the learning curve.
Mm-hmm.
And particularly, I kind of had tagged the beginning of this year as like, all right, it's time to think about this and what the last year looked like and felt like. And there's a lot of things that I'm proud of, and, kind of being on a small team and starting a new brand has been super exciting. But how do you take care of yourself while also doing that? And particularly how many people our industry has lost in the last year, in the last few years, has taken a toll, like mentally. Like I think about it in terms of like, is this the price that we pay to do this in our roles? And what can we do differently to not have that just be a cost that's built in?
Right.
I don't have any smart answers for you, unfortunately, but it's definitely a work in progress.
Well, there's no silver bullet. If you eat poorly and you don't offset that with either relaxation or exercise, that will take its toll, even if you're not drinking. So then you layer in drinking heavily, and then your body just gives out. And it's an interesting thing because, you had this string of comedians that died in the 80s because of this lavish lifestyle. And it probably goes without saying, there's a lot of drug use as well. So you had this third thing, and people are just putting themselves out to pasture because of these lifestyles. So because that's one of the things is Eric is so charismatic, and I'll stop making it about him right here in a second. But what do you do if you don't want to be like that? You know what I mean? Because I'll be on a little bit, or when I choose to, but I couldn't imagine having to do it day in, day out. So you have seemingly, to me, found a way to leverage everything else you're really good at: thinking, writing, your humor, and that's the way that you can do this role, so you can do it in your own way.
Yeah, finding other outlets. And I think for me with this role, one of the key elements of it is that I'm working with a brand that does tree planting as part of our core mission. So this year I've thought about more ways to pivot in that direction, like go on nature hikes, or like how to build it into what you already have to do.
Yeah.
So like biking for me was kind of something that took that role when I was a bartender in New York.
Yeah.
Like before I decided to ride a bike across the country, I'd never ridden more than 10 miles at one time ever.
No kidding.
And I kind of just came up with this, had that thought that turned into this thing.
Yeah.
And I started doing it as a commuter because I felt like we were drinking a lot behind the bar. We would close, food till 3:30, close till 4. Oftentimes you'd be there until 6 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
And I lived, in Ridgewood, Queens, which at the time felt like the other side of the moon, right?
Yeah.
New York City keeps growing out and expanding. But it was like a relatively long commute at the time. And biking for me became the way to not have to wake up early and go to the gym and build in this other specific piece of a routine that you had to give something up for. It was something that I could slot into what I was already doing that made me better at that and also made me healthier
in the process.
Yeah.
That's a really smart way to do it. There's this fundamental talent, I think, or fundamental trait that people have to have in the hospitality industry, and that is liking other people, which can be very trying at times. But given that you self-proclaimed, you're not a superstar, you're a supporting player, if you will, or maybe even like a screenwriter or something like that, right? How is it? Did you feel you had the natural skill set to go out in front of people all the time and charm them, not even as an ambassador, but just as a server, as a bartender? So that's something that you You obviously took to it, but did you find that it was a natural quality?
Yes and no. I mean, I've always had this like performative element, but I think that for me, it's more of a duality. It's more of, whereas I think some of the folks who are tremendous at it and like the best at being the charisma or the leading man, so to speak, in our industry that I know personally, much more gain their power from that.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas for me, it's like I have to have a bank that's full and I can spend it
I see. Yeah.
to be the leading man for a night or whatever.
Mm.
Like 3 bar shifts in a row back in the day when we were doing bartending. And maybe that would be a 42-hour, 3-day stretch.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would sleep for the whole first day off or whatever.
Yeah.
So I think it's a different use of resources
That's
where I can
very
access
interesting,
that
yeah.
space.
Because I feel recharged when I talk to people. We do some classes about agave and stuff in that setting, and I know you did some substitute teaching. Did that refill you at all? No, it's different when you're kind of serving drinks, right? It's kind of like an output. Now, even though people can give you stimulating conversation and encourage you and all of that, but teaching's a little different. It's like top down, right? Did you find that the dynamic there was that refueled you, or was it the same kind of thing where you needed your rest, build the reserve back up, and then go deliver it out?
I think for me, it's more of like a scale thing where large groups and being on stage and being in front of a lot of people or having to command a lot of attention is something that takes away energy. And then smaller groups or one-on-one conversation is recharging.
I see.
And so kind of having a balance between those two things, because too much time in solitude is also not the best.
Sure.
So it's, I don't know, from my understanding, that's kind of the difference between being introverted and extroverted just naturally.
Uh-huh.
And this is like the ambivert, is I can appear like an extrovert
Sure.
in, fits and starts. And when you have to go on stage and do a general sales meeting or whatever, throw a party or DJ for 10 hours or do the charity bartending shift anymore. It's like, I do think that I was pretty good at those things when I did them. But it was never the thing that grew my energy source.
Interesting. Yeah, I think it's a really interesting way to look at it. Getting recharged versus you needing to recharge yourself, and like that kind of, it's a very interesting dynamic with people. One of the things I think that's also very difficult with this industry, you can say mental health, but it's the process of finding solace and finding solitude. This could be yoga for some people. It could be meditation and whatnot. But do you have is it easy for you to step away and to just unwind truly and be at peace?
I think that's another one of the challenging pieces about moving into a role like this, is that kind of being the face of a brand, which is like what the brand ambassador is, or I jokingly refer to myself as the mascot sometimes, and being plugged into things like social media and kind of having to run a social media channel or being tasked with that as certain parts of the responsibilities, is it's hard to turn that off even over holidays, right? Because you're supposed to be posting. And so even when you aren't in front of people, there are elements of the job that are very difficult to turn off. And I think that, again, I would think of that as part of the learning curve, and I'm still in the meat of that learning curve, is just being able to put up actual walls for yourself and protect your space and time.
Yeah.
And I tend to be fairly willing to overinvest because I really believe in the thing and I want it to succeed and am happy to put in that effort. But I've also have kind of a history of riding it too hard, of overinvesting and then burning out. Yeah. So I'm aware of that of myself and am still trying to find ways to put up walls while, continuing to push this forward.
Sure. Music's still a big part of your life?
Absolutely.
Playing or listening, both?
Playing less so, and that kind of fits into all these other narrative bits about believing less in myself as a leading man, but I still love culture and particularly consuming it and thinking about it and using it as a motivator.
Exactly. So I also know you're a big film fan too. Has there been anything recently that you've heard via music or that you've seen via film that has really inspired you or given you a different perspective on this whole thing that we call life?
Oh, it's like this whole thing that we call life, or this whole thing that is this role in this job.
That's right.
this being the end of the decade, I spent some time in the last few weeks looking back on a lot of the stuff that's come out over the last few years.
Yeah.
My top couple of films from this last decade were First Reformed,
The
Paul
Ethan Hawke
Schrader,
movie.
Ethan Hawke movie.
I haven't seen it yet.
Just because it deals with spirituality and the environment
Uh-huh.
and how those two things kind of intersect in a way that nothing else is doing. Like nobody in Hollywood seems to be trying to have that dialogue about what are we doing to the planet? How does that deal with us? And how do we deal with that as people and with our relationship with God, whether or not he exists?
Sure.
And so that's just a really interesting thing that since I saw it, haven't stopped thinking about it.
Really?
But my second favorite movie was Paddington 2. So there's like a huge dichotomy
I love Paddington.
there.
I don't know why. But that's again a tribute. You can attribute it to your duality. What is it about the lightness, the friendliness, and the Britishness, which I love Paddington, man. The first one was like a perfect movie to me, just for the family or just for even adults. But like, what about that appealed to you?
This ties into maybe seeing also the Fred Rogers documentary. He's kind of been a hot topic the last few years. Is that I also spent a lot of time reading the news obsessively, and just felt exhausting to wake up in a world where the news cycle is scary or frightening or frustrating every single day, and internally and externally in our industry. And so to have something that's just focusing on what it means to be nice and to be kind to each other, but that's also in this beautiful, fun package with tremendous actors. Like it's nice to have levity that it also has some meat on the bones.
And there's class to it too. That's one of the things that I find. We'll talk about Baby Yoda for a second because I think it's funny. Every time I watch The Mandalorian, I hadn't rewatched the episodes, but the first time going through them, I couldn't stop laughing and giggling about how cute this character was, right? And I started to think why. I was like, why? Why is it so cute? And then I realized it's the perfect intersection of elderly people and babies. Two things that are like super cute, but has it not provided a lot of joy for people? The single character.
You can follow me on Twitter if you really want to see all of my opinions about how the Walt Disney Corporation has handled the Star Wars franchise.
That's a whole different thing.
But yeah, Baby Yoda rules. Baby Yoda is one thing, and that's another like moment, and that's like why I love the Paddington 2 thing or the Fred Rogers thing. It's like this moment of levity that we can all unite behind. That's just beautiful and fun, even if the show is kind of just nothing happens and was kind of whatever.
It's like Wilford Brimley, kind of. Do you know who that is?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, like he has a Wilford Brimley kind of quality. I'm sorry, but he does. But that's good because it is this weird intersection of time and space and utter cuteness. And what was the name? I thought this was good. What was the name that you thought he had? Charleston or something like that?
Oh. That's just like, that's a whole other thing.
I
could talk about
funny,
that. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I don't want to waste the next 20 minutes of this podcast going down stupid internet rabbit holes.
But I'll leave it at this. I think Nigel is the perfect name.
That's absolutely.
Isn't that great?
Dude, you're like walking into so many things. We could talk for 2 hours because you're stepping on like all of my. So like Charles was a nickname that we gave to the third member of our crew, and Eric and I were working at Extra Fancy, and our other friend from New England started working with us.
Yeah.
His name was Andrew Lind. And our boss was going to the store one day, and he was like, TJ, you need anything? Tom Johnson.
Yeah.
Eric Job, EJ, you need anything? And he was like, hey, Andrew, do you need anything? And he's like, what? Wait, what's your middle name? And he's like, Charles. And we're like, all right, he's Charles. He's just Charles. He's AJ now.
See, this is good. Efficiency.
And
right?
That became a whole thing. And then the Charleston was just because I think that's hilarious. And that's like a lot of my Twitter presence is actually just kind of joking with these like low-level celebrities and podcast folks that I like a lot. So the Reply All guys.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Alex Goldman, just like anti-humor is his thing. Like Florence Pugh, why don't we talk about Florence P? Or like The Mandalorian, when's anybody going to talk about The Woman DeLorean? Like, it's just like the stupidest jokes ever.
See, but we'll leave it at this. That's what Twitter should really be about.
Yeah, that's the level that I engage.
Fucking jokes. Because that's the best part of the whole thing. That's why I love it. So, we're going to talk about how this rule formed. But there are two moments I want to kind of compare. So there's this moment where you move into the brand role. You're in Seattle, but there's also this moment where you depart from academia and what you potentially studied for. What was kind of the final straw that drove you into hospitality?
Being a depressed person, and that could be a whole other 2-hour-long podcast too. Again, I kind of describe it flippantly as having a midlife crisis in my mid-20s, but kind of moving from Providence to New York, and then also moving from New York to Seattle was this attempt to like run away from myself, which is another thing that you learn. You can't do that. Wherever you go, there you are.
There you are.
Whether you're you there in Providence or you there in New York.
That's a great point.
But I was also kind of like living the life of a retired person after graduating college. Couldn't really find work. Was working in libraries with like late middle-aged women.
Yeah.
Which was rad at the time, but I had never drank before. I was living a domestic life, cohabitating, had no friends to speak of, and was just going to library and then going home. And like, there's nowhere to go from here. And so Eric Job was kind of the catalyst. It was like, come to New York, we'll figure the rest of it out.
Got it.
So that was the leap to New York, which got me into hospitality, which I was horrible at in the beginning. He was like, fine dining, just come on in. I'm going to stick my neck out for you. I don't do this for a lot of people. Yeah. You'll figure it out.
Of course.
And for a month solid, the manager went to him and he's like, we got to fire your boy. Like, he's the worst person that's ever worked here.
Yeah.
And every day for a month, and I was staying on his couch at the time too, for the first month that I was in New York. And he was like, don't fire him. It's going to work out. You got to just give him another minute. And then like in month 2, I was training all of the other back servers.
Amazing.
They're like, something just clicked. He realized that he was terrible. And so there was like a lot of come to Jesus moments in my first year in New York. That was a big part of that trajectory. And then again, it was kind of like, got tired of New York, jumped on a bike as a way to try and run away from myself.
Was it, I'll share this. I've had really difficult and trying relationships in my life. And it's driven me to greatness, but also very, very dark places, right? So these moves, you talk about cohabitating, so I have to say that you're implying it. So were you also running away from a relationship?
I mean, I was, but it wasn't that specifically. It was much more me and being depressed. And for me, when you're depressed, the hardest thing it is to do is identify that you're depressed. Yeah. That's when it's at its worst, is when you can't put words to how dark a hole you're in.
Yeah.
And that has often expressed in my inability to be a good partner or friend. And that's like when it gets the worst and I need to do something to run away from that thing, that person, that place. But that person and place is me then. And floating some big thing like moving to New York or riding a bike is the big thing that you need to put in front of yourself to get out of that, or that I needed to put in front of myself. And I think that the bike thing and it not being a silver bullet, being an even bigger, more challenging thing, kind of helped illuminate and give me a lot more grounding the next time that I face that.
Yeah.
Hopefully I won't just do that again and ride a bike or I don't know, learn how to fly an airplane and fly it to some other weird giant city or something.
I mean, if you there's boats left, you can still do boats. You can take a boat somewhere. There's planes. If you became a conductor for a train, that's old school, but that's pretty good too.
There's got to be tracks that go somewhere, but why not?
Always somewhere, right? So in 2017, we're 2020 now, right? Jeez.
Yeah.
Man, okay, so this is a couple years already. You've been doing this thing. How'd the conversation start for you to become part of what you call the singular Noble Oak team?
So I don't even know. I've like developed this narrative that I now tell as like the story version of this thing, because just the sheer facts. There's a lot of kismet in my entire trajectory in this industry, and I think kind of what defines a lot of what I've done in this industry is not knowing better, not knowing that something shouldn't happen, and so then doing whatever thing I thought was the thing that should be done because nobody ever told me that wasn't the way to do it. Like definitely our Muscle Shirt Mondays at Extra Fancy was like, I don't know any better. I don't know how a bar works. We're just going to do this because it's going to be fun and I'm working with my buddies. And then when I started working at bars in Seattle, I think that was a really rough transition period for me, and a lot of things didn't work out in the beginning.
Yeah.
And then I got in close with some brand folks because I had that resume where I'd done a lot of brand stuff and done a lot of production and events. Got to Seattle where the market was very different, and this gig kind of just existed. It came to exist.
Sure.
And I had grown close with the Edrington portfolio woman, Jamie Buckman, up there. And then it was an old bar regular of ours, a good friend of Eric's and mine, who used to come in Extra Fancy all the time and was associated with the Varna people, had moved out to San Francisco and started working for Anchor, moved back, got the Edrington role as their innovations person.
Oh, wow.
And had developed this brand, reached out to me and said, hey, we're thinking about launching a new product in Seattle. I know that you just moved there. Have you met anybody that you think would be a good fit for this role? And so just like that, like boom, in my inbox is like this thing. And I was like, yeah, I've always loved working with the Edrington folks. We did in New York. I do now in Seattle. I love the portfolio. What's the gig? She's like, well, just here's the thing. Here's the link to the job description. Pass it along to anybody that you think would be good. So I threw my name in and, made it through the round of interviews, and then got to the point where they were like, all right, here's the product. Edrington, we're launching a bourbon. Yeah. Great bourbon with a noble heart, tree planting. I was like, this just fits. Everything about this fits. Yeah. And so I got the gig to launch the brand in Seattle.
So I didn't know I'd had this whiskey. So I know Emily, we got a bottle and I got to spend some time with it, And we talked about this before we started recording. Whiskey people can be fucking so I'm so tired of like the community, because it's not really community. It's just like, oh, I found a Weller Toll. Fuck off, mate. You ruined the whole goddamn thing for the rest of us. We've been drinking good bourbon for a long time, and that's the thing. So this can be tricky, the way that this product is, but we don't need to traverse that. What I want to say is I really like the way it tastes, and it's got heavy sherry influence, right? So tell us how the sherry bit gets in there, because for me, that's what makes this so unctuous.
Let the record show that I didn't say that about the bourbon community.
Of course you let me say that. That's me saying that. Actually, I've went to every extent of my content creation abilities to make fun of that community, because my dad's turning into one of those guys.
Oh no.
But I'm so happy I've inspired him to drink
Mike,
more.
you gotta save him, dude.
I did tell him the other day. I was like, okay, these are good bottles, but I want you to buy stuff from other distilleries so you can taste the differences. He's like, all right, I'll do that. I'm like, that's all I can ask. So he'll eventually find that treated sherry influenced whiskeys are the best.
So I want to back up here just a little bit and give you what I think is the fundamental lesson that I've learned since I started bartending, which is something that Robert Kruger was my mentor in the early days of Extra Fancy. He decided we were open until 4 a.m. every day before anything else was ever happening. So from midnight to 4 a.m. was just going to school. Yeah. He's teaching me all the lessons. And the first and most important lesson he ever taught me was cocktails are supposed to be fun. And so for me, that's the central thesis. And that's what I've taken through this line of work, is that there's a hospitality angle to everything, including sales and being a brand ambassador, talking about whiskey. Yeah. It should be fun. So if you're like, whatever, pick a brand. I think this stuff sucks because this or that or the other thing. Whatever, mate. Like, yeah, cocktails are supposed to be fun. Have fun with it. Find what you like. Find what you love. Find why you like it. Be able to, go to bat for that. And for me, that gets me to this product. So when it launched, it's Noble Oak, great bourbon with a noble heart. Now we got to get a little bit brand ambassador-y. Sure. This is the first ever innovation from Edrington Group. So Edrington, y'all know what Edrington does. Macallan, Highland Park, Glenrothes, is tremendous single malt scotches, 10 times more for their casks than the rest of the Scotch industry year after year, said to control 90% of the world's sherry-seasoned European oak casks, right? If that's the purchase that you have in the whiskey industry and you want to start a bourbon, you're going to make a sherry-finished bourbon.
Which is smart.
And you're not going to be able to win against the other huge Kentucky bourbon distilleries. Making a new mash bill isn't going to make something interesting.
Right.
The kind of space that was already available to play in has been explored by High West, being able to buy a bunch of old stock from all over the place and blend it, which is kind of like what Compass Box is doing, right? Like these have already been areas that have been breached. So unless you're going to start a new distillery somewhere, which, eventually Edrington also partnered up with, Wyoming whiskey, a whiskey that stands alone, comes from a different place, does a different thing. What are you going to do? You're going to get that sherry into the whiskey, and we use a different process to get there.
Yeah.
But the key thing for me is that there's no colors, chemicals, additives, or other bullshit. It's just heat and pressure and wood and whiskey in a bit of a different way.
Exactly.
A different form factor.
That's it right there. This is natural, but it has some other nice influences given the reach and the resources of Macallan and Edrington on the whole. But one of the things I think that's nice, and I know that Angel's Envy has kind of claimed to do the same thing, but they do it like once a year. But tell me about, you say, bourbon with a heart and all of that, which is great. But you guys are actually planting trees.
I've gone out and personally planted a bunch of trees myself because it's fun and also fits in with doing my job. So that's awesome.
What is someone called that plants trees? Is there, if that was a job, any idea?
Well, arborists are folks who love trees. I don't know if they're specifically the tree planters.
That's what I was thinking of, yeah.
I like to call them cool, nice people that I like to hang out with.
Tree people.
The tree bit is that Edrington is actually principally owned by a charity. And so one of their core pillars is giving back, giving more. This being the first ever innovation without a distillery that was purchased or partnered up with. They had the ability to have a blank slate and infuse their identity into this product. The brand manager at the time who launched this cared deeply about the environment and kind of got to have that personal angle.
Yeah.
And so reforestation, but more than reforestation, sustainability and focusing on green living and kind of the lifestyle piece of it became the identity of this product. So our tree planting partner is onetreeplanted.org. They're a national umbrella organization based out of New England, but they filter money to local organizations. So our plan as the brand scales up is to focus on the local markets where we've launched the brand, where we're engaging, where we're selling a lot of bottles, and plant the trees there.
Yeah.
So Austin being a big one, we're partnered up with tree folks here. Up in the Northwest in Seattle, I've gone out with Mountain to Sound Greenway Trust a number of times. So One Tree Planted is the national partner, but then there's local organizations like that do the reforestation.
That's great. How long is the brand for Texas? How long has it been around? Because I ran into it at Last Whiskeys of the World, for instance, and I know we had actually tasted it. And going back, I did recognize this was a sherry whiskey blind, and I was like, I like this because there's not a lot. So it's about a year and a half now?
It's somewhere in that range. I don't know the answer specifically, to be honest, because they never gave me the master spreadsheet. My understanding is that it launched in late 2017 in Seattle. That's when I started the gig, November, October. We had about 8 months of exclusivity in Seattle, and then it launched to New York and Detroit.
No shit.
Was our second and third markets.
That's
I think
cool.
Austin was fourth. So it was about a year after, so late 2018.
Yeah. How you feeling about the brand's growth in this short period of time?
We've been ahead of schedule in every market that we've launched in. It's been great. The reception has been great. The issue with this and a lot of other things is just it's a bandwidth issue. Trying to be everywhere all the time, be everybody's friend everywhere on earth. And that's just a challenge, but it's kind of a good problem to have.
I don't care that it's 10:45 in the morning. I'm not condoning it, but I'm also not judging.
We're drinking whiskey.
So the roll's been going well. The brand's building. I really think I like this. I don't care how old it is. I just think it's rich enough. It's got enough texture, and that's what really counts because there's lots of whiskeys out there, and this still does taste different than those, but in a familiar way, right? That's how I feel. So we're talking about the future. You're 33. You guys have just dropped this rye. Is that correct?
Yeah, so that's why I get to come hang out in Texas this week is we're launching the rye now. So rye, again, similar trajectory, launched in Seattle the beginning of last year and is now rolling out around the country.
Same process ultimately with the sherry influence?
Same process, but we're using a different wood for the finish. So whereas like the Angel's Envy portfolio is mostly anchored with their bourbon that is port cask and then their rye that is rum cask, we're doing Oloroso sherry for the bourbon and now Ruby Port for the rye.
Mm.
And I think it still fits into the narrative that Edrington's cask management is some of the best in class. And through their sherry barrel creation, they have purchase over kind of cask management and access to a bunch of different woods.
Yeah.
It's not entirely sherry seasoned oak in the portfolio. If you taste something like Highland Park Twisted Tattoo, they're starting to introduce red wine casks and other world whiskey casks or other world casks.
I think that's the thing that's going to start making whiskey a bit more exciting. No one's done a Sauterne yet, but that's probably in the cards. And doing Ruby Port, or rather just port in general, it's just what makes this stuff exciting. So we're going to sip this, and I'm going to ask, you're going to be 40 at some point.
Lord willing, I guess, yeah.
And maybe I'm projecting I turn 40 next month, so it's like, shit, Creatively, professionally, are there any real big mile markers for you that you see here in the next chapter of your life? I mean, you got kid number 2 with the ride that just dropped. Obviously, you're going to be traveling a lot for that. But anything that you want to write, anything that you want to sing, any big things like that you're considering?
This is my hottest take. No. The answer to your question is no, and there never has been. And that has kind of been defining or definitive perhaps in my trajectory, and that ties into kind of like just not knowing any better.
Yeah.
So like my extra fancy chapter, I really think of it as like, I'm going to do this thing and hang out with my friends. It's like this old Kevin Smith bit where he's like, I just want to make movies with my friends. Why'd I have to put Jason Schwimmer in this movie?
Yeah.
And so as long as I'm hanging out and having fun, making friends, then the rest of it, we'll ride that as long as we can, as long as I can stay healthy doing it. And I just want to do cool shit. So I really love the brand and the work and the tree planting and the reforestation and being able to have the charity elements and tie it into other cool things and build communities across the country. That's what turns me on much more than even the whiskey, which I do love.
Yeah.
Is those things, connecting with humans, having these moments of humanity, being able to go and chat with cool people like yourself.
I appreciate that.
And then when I stop being able to do that, then I'll go do something else where I get to do something cool.
Yeah. Something I really appreciate about that. Here's an insight, Tom. This is one of the things, maybe people realize this or not. When I ask questions, I'm really asking myself. So when I mentioned the bit about not being able to, you can unwind, but there's always things on your mind. There is always stuff on my mind. And there's always planning. And it's like, I've got this project. So it's refreshing and inspiring to me to know that you're like, dude, 1 foot in front of the other. We'll see what happens. And you don't plan it and map it out so intentionally.
That was the most sound moment of my life, was the moment before I went on a big bike ride. And I spent 8 months of my life telling myself that I had a date to plan for and that I was going to do a big thing on that date.
Yeah.
Because it allowed me to orient everything else around this big monolithic thing that seemed crazy and impossible. And I was so grounded in that knowledge. And going back to David Foster Wallace a bit, reading Infinite Jest was a huge moment for me. It's something that I did in kind of the lead up to moving to New York and just orienting myself and having someone to connect with in these feelings. And the mantra of one day at a time and reducing something like, how do you eat an elephant? How do you bike across the country? Right? We rode 92 days, and you can talk about that journey and think, how did you ride 92 days? It's insane. It's like, well, we just rode for one day, and then did it again the second day.
Yeah.
And then did it again the third day and got tired and took a day off, and then did it again the fourth day.
Yeah.
And so if you break it down to this, how do you ride 100 miles? Well, you ride 1, and then you get to 10. And so it's kind of trying to stick with that philosophy and not get overwhelmed by the fact that we want to sell 1 million bottles of Noble Oak by 2030 or whatever number somebody made up.
Sure.
And it is this kind of retail politics thing of I feel pacified and strong in the knowledge that everywhere that I go, every market that I go to, as long as I'm hanging out with people, they're having a good time, they see and touch the brand, then we're headed in the right direction. Even if I didn't sell 100 bottles this week or whatever, that doesn't matter. Yeah. If we're having fun, we're making friends, we're going to get to the good stuff's going to happen.
I like that. It's an interesting paradigm, but one that's very positive. And what it is has no lens of judgment. Whatever will be, right? So I've got 2 questions left for you.
It's what it is.
It is what it is. What there was something you said that's from a movie. It's like, oh yeah, wherever you go, there you'll be, or something. That's from,
Oh, yeah.
Do you know what movie that's from?
I don't even know what movie that is. There's actually an old friend that said that to me, and he was probably quoting a movie, so I'm as like a 6 degrees of separation thing there, so I don't know the movie. But I think that I famously said, I have a bad feeling about this about midway through the J.J. Abrams snuck that one into the middle of this interview.
Oh, man, oh shit. Real quick, because I just tasted this rye.
Yeah. Welcome.
Wow. Dude, there's this crazy electric thing that's happening right in the middle. It's like that wine influence comes. Normally, you would think port's like really, really like a heavy underbelly for the back palate to kind of support it. But no, dude, this is it's there's this vibrant electric citric quality right in the middle. It's not the rice spice. And I'm like, okay, cool. But like, no, that impacted me. On mic, you could hear that shit.
It tastes good, man. And these really bottles are $35 and $40 at retail. I mean, I think that's, that with the good quality and the good stories is where it's at.
40, they're both 45?
35 for the bourbon, roughly, depending on where you are, what you're listening to. 45% alcohol on the bourbon and 48 on the rye.
Killer. That's great. So the first of the last 2 questions, and this is one I ask every guest, and that is, you're sipping the bourbon. You can sip whatever you want, but just because it's right in front of me, I'm looking at it. So you're sipping the Noble Oak bourbon, okay? With anybody, living or deceased. It doesn't matter where, but who would you love to sit down and have a conversation with over a glass of bourbon?
Yeah, I prepped for this question by listening to your podcast on my last 2 big drives, and I totally forgot whatever the smart thing I thought I was going to say, and now we've been talking about David Foster Wallace, and for a long time I kind of viewed him as my spirit animal. So I think in the context of the conversation, it would have to be him. And I've listened to so many of his words, and they've moved me and touched me so much. And also, he's kind of come under fire for a lot of different things, largely deservedly, in recent years, kind of revisiting his stuff and having that perspective. I think it would be really interesting to have a chat with him.
Interesting. I mean, very, very interesting and dark fate for him, And this is the thing, man, is like and I'm not by any means glorifying that, right? Like ending your life and stuff. But there's an artistic bit to that, And I'm not saying it's good, I'm not saying it's bad, but there's something romantic about it still. And it's interesting that his words can live on that way, and he'll never have to face any judgment for it. And I think that's a really, really important thing. But because of the levity, like Paddington 2, or like The Mandalorian, Baby Yoda, etc., you guys are heading to San Antonio next week for the conference, right?
Yeah, we get a party on Wednesday. So come check us out at the Edrington party if you're hearing this week. It's also tied to good cause. It's called Raising Spirits. We're going to be hanging out with the Here Nor There folks at Blue Box.
Oh, no shit. So Terry and Nick are going?
Yeah.
Oh, great. Okay. Yeah, it's good, man. Good crew. I'm glad you're getting combined with them. Their thoughtfulness with cocktails is just remarkable stuff.
And they're fun guys, too. Don't let them lie to you and think that they're not fun because they live in their sexy little dungeon and make super thoughtful cocktails. They're good, fun guys.
Good blokes in general, right? Well, Tom, we've been working on this, I think maybe 6 months or something to try to make this happen. And finally it's happened. And finally we're sitting here drinking whiskey together. And I couldn't be more thankful for a moment like this. And I appreciate Emily helping coordinate from the distributor and stuff. So, man, I really appreciate it.
I just wish we had another hour to talk. I feel like we got so much good stuff to say.
And this is where we take it off mic. And then we'll talk some more.
Well, cheers, brother. Cheers, really appreciate it.
It's been a pleasure. I'll talk to you soon, yeah?
Yeah, hope so.
Well, there we have it. Tom Johnson. What do you guys think? This Noble Oak whiskey is quite delicious. I am a huge fan of sherry finished whiskeys as well. This port finished rye that's dropping in Austin anytime soon. Tom and I have been working on this interview for a few months now. I had no idea that the world is so small that he and Eric Job are such good friends. Previous interviewee on the show. And you know what? Talked about life. Very, very intelligent, articulate guy. And if you guys get the chance to go to the San Antonio Cocktail Conference next week, Wednesday, they're throwing a nice party with the Brits and the Austinites from Here Nor There, Terry and Nick. So stop by if you can. So thanks everybody for listening to Show to V with Mike G. No matter how much you're waiting for this crazy storm to hit Austin, Texas, or if you're thinking, I think The new James Bond film might be pretty good. Please keep dancing.